Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Connie, I'm the owner here at Faff Designs, and I don't know what that finger was. I am going to start off by saying, if you don't subscribe to my channel, I'd love it if you could subscribe. I normally say that at the end of the video, but I know you don't all watch to the end of my videos, so I'm going to say it now. If you are already a subscriber, thank you very much. So onto the piece I'm going to work on the video today. So this piece behind is actually something that I didn't intend on buying. I am sourcing some furniture for a custom design, and I thought this possibly might fit the bill. So I was pinging the seller a load of questions about the piece, and it turned out that my customer, it didn't fit their needs, and it was too good to let go. So I ended up buying it for myself. Even though I don't need it, I have plenty of furniture to go out in my storage units. It ended up being bought by me. What I'm going to do with it is do kind of a bit of an industrial kind of farmhousey look, which is actually my favourite style to work on. I'm going to use Terra Clay Paint, and I know a lot of people, a lot of other people that use Terra have all said that it's really good for layering and blending, and me included. I've shown videos where I've used several Terra Clay Paint colours. It is really good for layering and blending, but I'm going to show you that you can do a piece using a one colour finish with Terra Clay Paint. Now, disclaimer, I am going to be using other products as well. I'm not just going to be using one colour of Terra Clay Paint and that's it. There will be other products that I'm going to use as well, but I will only be using one colour from the Terra Clay Paint range. And if you can guess what it is, gold star for you. As always, I'm going to start with the prep because this one did need some prep work, and there's some holes on the top. Someone got a little bit stabby here. That is not woodworm. That has been made with a sharp implement. That sharp implement looks like it's also been made to create some kind of stripes down the front. And then we've got evidence of a dog that has chewed two corners of this. One on the right and one on the left. The one on the right is a lot worse than the one on the left, so we're going to have to repair all of this before I can get to the good stuff. So the first thing that I did is take off the handles, because I'm not going to be using those, and I also gave it a really good clean with Dixie Belle's White Lightning cleaner. I hoovered all of the drawers because they were really dusty and they had a few bits of, I don't even know what it was in there. So hoovered it all out, cleaned it, and then rinsed it with water. The second thing I'm going to do to this is make sure all those deep gouges are filled. So I'm using a strong 2-part filler, and the way it works is that you put some, I just mix it on the lid. I put some filler on the lid. You can also do this on a paper plate or whatever. And then I add some hardener to it. You only need a very small amount of hardener. The more hardener you add, the quicker this stuff dries. And it's a bit stinky, but it is very, very strong. As I mentioned, the left hand side is not as severe as the other side, so all I'm going to do is add a little bit of tape, and that's just going to make me kind of keep the shape of the sort of filler, if you like, so it's not going to drop off the end. And I'm just going to use the spatula that you get in the tub to apply this with. I've also used my finger. Not a great idea to do that because this stuff does stick. And then the other side was a lot worse, so I'm just going to tap a nail in. And what that's going to do is provide a little bit of grip for the filler, so that it's not just one piece of filler hanging on for dear life onto that corner, and it's not at risk of kind of falling off if it gets knocked. If you put a couple of nails in, that just gives it a little bit more of something to grip onto, if that makes sense. So it's not kind of just tagged onto the end. And then I'm going to do the same thing again, and I'm going to really roughly kind of work the shape of that corner piece. With the leftover filler, I also filled the existing handle holes. I'm just adding a little bit of tape on the back because the existing hole went all the way through the drawer. So obviously if you don't tape the back, you will just basically push filler into the drawer inside. And then the last little bit of filler before it went hard, I just filled the holes in the very top there that were caused by something sharp. once that was dry, I then sanded it flat. This stuff does dry pretty quickly, especially the areas where I'd only applied it quite thinly, like on the top and in the holes on the drawer fronts. The two corners took a little bit longer to dry, but that's obviously because I put it on a little bit thicker there. And also I sanded, as well as sanding it flat, I'm also taking off the existing finish. So I did this with a 120 grit sheet on my Festool sander, and I'm just taking that orange varnish right off. There is a good reason for that. So I had to do that all over the piece, took all the orange varnish off the drawer fronts and everything. And then I took the sander and really roughly kind of started to sand that dried down filler into the shape of what the corner would have looked like. So obviously this is quite a rounded corner, so I just used the sander to kind of start getting that shape. It didn't look perfect, but quite often when I need to use quite a lot of filler, I'll do it in 2 passes. Again, I went and sanded the existing finish off the front of the drawers because I'm going to do a paint wash on there, so I needed the wood exposed. And then I went in with the second lot of filler on that right hand side. So like I say, this one was the worst. I'm just using a tongue depressor stick to apply this in kind of like just a second application, and that's going to help me get that kind of curve shape. And I'm just, if you can see, I'm just kind of making it go around the corner a little bit. As that was drying, I then treated the knots on the front. Now, this is going to be a very rustic kind of industrial finish, so I don't mind the odd kind of rustic ding here or there, but this was very, very knotty, and that's because it's a new pine. So I'm treating this with knotting solution, and that's going to stop the knots from bleeding through. When the corner was dry, I then went back in with my sander and finally just hand sanded it just to get that perfect kind of curved shape of the corner. And that was an awful lot of talking all in one go. But as you can see from my little shaky close-up here, obviously it's white, but you can see that it has kind of got that curved shape. And once you paint over that, you will never know that a naughty little dog had chewed it away. So as you can see from the top, the next thing I'm going to do is create the impression that this piece is darker brown than what it actually is. So I'm going to distress the final colour, and I don't want to see this orangey tone pine underneath. So I'm going to use a wash of paint to give the effect that this is a darker toned wood. I'm going to use the colour Umber from Silk Mineral Paint. I'm going to add some water to my roller tray. And this is a brand new product, by the way, from Dixie Belle. So they now sell rollers, and you can buy the complete kit where you get the tray, the handle and the roller heads, and you can also buy the replacement roller heads on their own as well. I'm going to use this for speed to get this base coat on quick, and I'm just going to add some umber to my paint tray, a dash of water to loosen it up, and I'm just going to create it a kind of stain looking finish all over this piece. It's not going to be perfect, it doesn't have to be perfect because it's not really going to be seen. Where I distress the final colour, I just want to see little bits of dark wood, not the orange wood. So that's why I'm doing it like this, just quite quick, easy, rough and ready. But just a word of warning, if you are using silk, I know there is a myth out there, and I've probably said it before in my videos, where you shouldn't add water to silk mineral paint. That is technically true, because you won't get all the advantages that silk offers if you start adding large quantities of water to it. So if you're buying silk and you want it for the stain blocking primer that's built into the paint, and you also want it for the built-in top coat that's built into the paint, be aware that if you are adding water in any large quantity, any more than 10% water to silk, it will start to break those components down, and it basically won't do its job because you've added too much water to it, you've diluted it. So be aware that if you do add a lot of water to silk, you may need to prime, you may need to top coat, and it might not do what it says it's going to do because you've diluted it down. But I'm not going to be using silk for those reasons, so this isn't going to be a solid colour finish in silk. If it was, I wouldn't be adding water. I'm just using this to give like a stain effect, but you could also use the colour chocolate, you could also use the colour coffee bean in the chalk mineral paint ranges to give that kind of effect. I'm using this as opposed to an actual stain because number one, it's going to dry super quick. Number two, if I use an oil based stain, it's likely to bleed through into my paint. I just want to give the impression that it's stained dark. I don't want to actually stain it dark with an oil-based stain, if that makes any sense at all. So you get the idea of what I'm trying to create here. That's why I am just applying this kind of rough and ready over the top of that raw wood with a roller. And I'm also, as well as just applying it on, I'm also going to wipe it back as well, because you'll get to see a little bit of the wood grain there. You've noticed I've just sprayed it a little bit, and that just lifts it slightly, and it just makes the wood grain visible so that it looks like a stain. So on to the fun part. If you guessed the colours pistachio at the very start of this video, well done, gold star for you. This is probably one of my all-time favourite ever colours in the whole of the Dixie Belle range. I absolutely love this colour. It's really unique and it looks really good when you do like an industrial kind of grungy finish. So I'm applying this in a stippling motion. I did it all over the piece, top, drawer fronts, bases, sides, you name it. It got a stippled effect, and that's just going to create a little bit of texture all over the piece. You can see the coverage of one coat is amazing. So I did do 2 coats in total, just so that I got that really kind of bold, like punchy colour. So I'm stippling it all over. You can do this with any brush. I'm just using a synthetic brush for this, but you can use a natural bristle brush because that's going to work equally as well too. And again, this is the second coat and I'm applying it in exactly the same way as the first, and you can see the colour difference here. It's quite a good shot because you can see how light this colour goes when it's dry, and that happens with all Terra Clay Paint colours. I nearly said silk, I meant Terra. This happens with all Terra Clay Paint colours. They go lighter as they dry, but then when you add the top coat, they go back to that original colour again. So 2 coats of pistachio have been added all over this, and now I'm going to wet distress it. So this is just a form of distressing that instead of taking a sanding sheet or an electric sander to your piece to sand away areas to distress it, you are basically using a cloth and water. And this technique works really well with Terra because it reactivates with water. So if you're wet distressing other paint, so chalk mineral paint or silk, you kind of need to be quite quick with this, and you need to do it when the paint's still wet. With Terra, you can allow the paint to dry fully before you wet distress. So this could have been dry months, and I could still come back to this, spritz it with water, and it would reactivate as long as you haven't top coated it. So all I'm doing is basically going round where the drawer fits into the piece, and I'm taking the edges of the drawer as well and removing the paint to reveal the dark brown base coat. For the feet, I'm using a finishing pad, which is a little bit like a scouring pad kind of finish, and obviously because it's a little bit more abrasive, it's going to take more of that green paint away. So I'm just concentrating that on the feet and some of the corners and edges, just to reveal more of the dark wood underneath in areas that I think might have aged naturally over time if this was an older piece. Finally, I'm just going to take my electric sander with a 320 grit sheet on it, so it's a super fine grit, and I'm just giving this a really light sand all over. And this isn't necessarily to distress it further or to smooth it down completely, it's just to kind of give it a little bit less texture. There's still texture there, which you'll see in the close-ups at the end, but it's just a little bit less than what there was originally. And then I'm going to top coat it. So I'm using Terra Tough. You do have to use specific top coats with Terra because some top coats just don't work with it. So this is Terra Tough, and it's very similar to Gator Hide, which is also from Dixie Belle. Gator Hide does work as well, and there's also a matte sealer that you can use if you want something with less of a shine. Thin coats of Terra Tough work best, so I did 2 thin coats all over and let this completely dry overnight. The next thing that I'm going to do is apply some Best Dang Wax in black, and I'm going to put this all over the entire piece. So Best Dang Wax is water based, and it's not recommended to seal Terra Clay Paint with, but once it is sealed with the appropriate top coat, you can then use the wax for any decorative finishes that you want. So for this, I'm using Best Dang Wax in black, which is going to give me quite a big contrast against that pale green. I'm using it with a Best Dang brush, and I am pretty much just swirling it over the entire piece. So what the aim of this is to just get it on there. It doesn't really matter about how thickly you put it on, because you'll be taking the excess off at a later stage. What I wanted to do is to get that black wax to sit in all of the recessed areas and that texture that I had added at the start. So it's going to sit in all the like little dints and grooves, and it's going to create a little bit of contrast as opposed to just having one flat colour on there. Just to show you the top as well, you can see the colour change. It just adds a little bit of that grungy kind of feel, as opposed to that nice kind of crisp finish that we had with just the plain green. And you don't have to be neat, as you can see here. You just literally whack this on. We're going to come back to it and tweak it in a second. Okay, so as you can see, it's now got black wax all over it. And now I'm going to go in and start removing the excess. So I'm going to create some tonal variation now, because we've gone from having quite a plain green finish to having something that's got black wax all over it. Again, there's not much tonal kind of variation or shading or shadow going on here. And this look, you can be quite dramatic with your shading. It's industrial, you can have a little bit of fun. And all I'm going to do is take a dry shop cloth, or you can use a lint-free rag as well, and I'm going to start removing it in certain areas where I want to highlight the green. So the black is going to create shadow, and removing the black is going to obviously create a highlight. And then to push the shadows back even further, I'm going to layer another coat of black wax over the top, and I'm just going to concentrate this around the edges of the drawers. There is a little bit of detail there already, but not a huge amount. They're pretty flat and boring. There's not really much detail on them. So I'm using a premium chip brush, and this is a dry brush, and it's a natural bristle brush. And I'm just adding a little bit of product. You can see me just tapping it into the wax as I go, so I don't want this to be a really heavy application. And I'm just creating some shading around the drawer edges with this. I'm also creating a little bit of shading around the handle, because that's where dirt and grime would build up if this was an authentically aged piece. And then to create some real tonal variation, I'm using clear wax as an eraser. So I'm using a fresh rag, and I've dipped a small amount of clear wax onto that rag, and this is going to act as an eraser. So it's also really useful to know that if you do apply your wax, your coloured waxes too heavily, you can erase them. You can use this as an eraser. You can also take a damp rag and erase it all together. However, I still wanted some of that black wax to sit in the kind of texture that I created with the paint, so I don't want to remove it all together. It's just useful to know that you can remove it if you wanted to. And I'm just going to basically create highlights. So we've got kind of highlights, we've got shadows, and this is just going to help give it more character. I don't want this to be symmetrical by any stretch of the imagination, so I don't want every single drawer to look exactly the same, because that wouldn't be how it'd be aged naturally. So you can see the difference there between the top drawer and the second drawer down, how much of a variation just taking a little bit of that black wax away has created. And I was ready to stage it. You can see I've got staging props all around me. And then last minute, I decided to add some numbers to the drawers in Barn Red chalk mineral paint, because why not? And I think this finishes off the look perfectly. And as you can see, as always, I include a couple of close-ups so you can see the distress work that I did, the black wax with all the kind of texture. Although it's subtle, it's really effective. And then the final stage shot, I did one without any staging props whatsoever, which is actually quite striking. So if you like the video, make sure you hit subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.